Turn off the lights, lock your doors, and be silent. Because the story you're about to hear works best in the quiet, when every sound feels louder and your mind starts imagining things on its own. Before we go further, tell me in the comments, where are you watching this from and what time is it right now? So without any further discussion, let's begin. I grew up in a house where certain conversations ended before they even began. My father had a way of shutting things down with a look, tight jaw, lowered eyes, the kind of silence that felt like a locked door. Most people inherit heirlooms or recipes or a sense of belonging. I inherited warnings. And of all the strange rules he carried, there was one he repeated so often that it almost became background noise. Don't go there. Not that town. Not ever. As a kid, I used to laugh at the intensity in his voice. It felt theatrical, like something from a documentary about places with cursed histories or unsolved tragedies. But he never gave me a story, never even gave the vague explanation parents usually offer when they need their child to obey without question. He'd just shake his head if I asked why and mutter, "Some things don't need to be seen." And that was it. The topic dissolved into the same heavy quiet that always seemed to surround him, the same quiet I never learned how to live inside. Even when I grew older, when most people begin to see their parents as human beings instead of immovable figures, he stayed a locked drawer in a room I wasn't allowed to enter. The older I got, the more obvious it became. Whatever he was holding back wasn't superstition, it was fear, real fear, something that lived beneath his skin. I saw it in the way his fingers twitched when our conversations drifted too close to that part of the map. I saw it in the way his voice would lower, like he wasn't talking to me, but to some memory that still had teeth. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself his obsessions were his burden, not mine. But there's a strange thing about silence. It doesn't disappear. It settles, like dust in the corners of your mind. And if you leave it long enough, it becomes part of the air you breathe without noticing. When the call came about his death, it felt muted, like the world dimmed instead of shattered. We hadn't spoken in months, maybe longer, not out of anger, but because neither of us knew how to fill the void between us. I listened to the details the hospital relayed, nodding at things I should have reacted to more strongly. But grief is not always dramatic. Sometimes it's just a small shift inside you, a quiet acknowledgement that something pivotal is gone, and you still don't understand why it ever mattered. Sorting through his belongings was harder than I expected. Not emotionally, physically. The man kept everything. Faded receipts, old locks without keys, photographs where half the faces were turned away or blurred, newspapers folded to pages that held no obvious significance. Everything felt like it belonged to someone I never truly met, and as I sifted through box after box, the silence of the house thickened, pressing into me with a kind of expectant weight, as if I were disturbing something that had been perfectly still for far too long. It was late, past midnight, when I found it. A thin, worn map wedged between two brittle books, the edges frayed and softened by years of handling. It wasn't a modern map, nothing digital or precise, just a piece of paper my father had touched countless times. I knew that instantly. Some things carry fingerprints you don't need to see. One town, near the southern edge, was circled in red. The ink was faded, but the pressure of the pen had cut slightly into the paper, like he'd pressed too hard, like it mattered too much. The name of the town, I'd seen it before, on road signs, on weather reports, on mail sent to neighbors. It wasn't some secret place tucked away in a forgotten corner of the world. It was ordinary, utterly, painfully ordinary. And that's what made the red circle look wrong, like it belonged to another map entirely. I sat there on the floor, the map spread across my knees, the room lit only by the weak glow of a desk lamp. The house creaked around me, the kind of small, sharp noises old wood makes when everything else is quiet. Each sound felt like a nudge, a reminder that I was alone in a space filled with someone else's secrets. For a moment, just a breath, I felt something I couldn't quite place. Not fear, not yet. More like the faint shift in air pressure when someone walks into a room behind you, except no one had. I told myself it was imagination, exhaustion, grief doing whatever it wanted with my senses. But as my eyes traced that red circle, I felt a pull, a small, steady gravity, the kind that starts as curiosity but grows into something heavier the longer you sit with it. Why this town? What did he see there? What did he think would happen to me?
One town near the southern edge was circled in red. The ink was faded, but the pressure of the pen had cut slightly into the paper, like he pressed too hard, like it mattered too much. The name of the town, I'd seen it before, on road signs, on weather reports, on mail sent to neighbors. It wasn't some secret place tucked away in a forgotten corner of the world. It was ordinary, utterly, painfully ordinary. And that's what made the red circle look wrong, like it belonged to another map entirely. I sat there on the floor, the map spread across my knees, the room lit only by the weak glow of a desk lamp. The house creaked around me, the kind of small, sharp noises old wood makes when everything else is quiet. Each sound felt like a nudge, a reminder that I was alone in a space filled with someone else's secrets. For a moment, just a breath, I felt something I couldn't quite place. Not fear, not yet. More like the faint shift in air pressure when someone walks into a room behind you, except no one had. I told myself it was imagination, exhaustion, grief doing whatever it wanted with my senses. But as my eyes traced that red circle, I felt a pull, a small, steady gravity, the kind that starts as curiosity but grows into something heavier the longer you sit with it. Why this town? What did he see there? What did he think would happen to me? I shouldn't have cared. I should have folded the map back into the forgotten pile and stepped away from it. But I kept staring at that circle, at the indentation of the pen strokes. My father's hand had trembled when he made them, subtle but unmistakable. A man doesn't draw lines like that unless the memory behind them is still alive, still pacing inside him. And the longer I looked, the colder the room felt, as if the map itself carried a draft from somewhere far away, somewhere I had no business going. But the thing about unanswered questions is that they don't go away. They wait, they linger, they whisper at the back of your mind until you can't ignore them. And for the first time in my life, I realized the silence my father always imposed wasn't a barrier, it was an invitation, one he never wanted me to accept. Yet there I was, staring at the map he left behind, feeling the weight of every unspoken warning pressing against my ribs. I told myself I just wanted closure, a simple explanation, something to bridge the space between the man he was and the man I thought he might have been. But the truth settled in slowly, like a shadow stretching across the floor. I was going to that town. And as the thought formed, fully, solidly, something in the house shifted again. A soft, almost imperceptible sound from the hallway. I froze, waited, listened. Silence, but not the same silence as before. This one felt aware. I folded the map, hands unsteady, and tried to shake off the feeling pressing into the back of my neck. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. I don't know. What I do know is that when I left the house that night, locking the door behind me, I could swear, just faintly, I heard something move inside. I didn't look back. I should have, but I didn't. And that small choice, that tiny, avoidable moment, was the first step toward understanding why my father feared that town more than anything else in his life. As soon as I crossed the faded wooden sign marking the town limits, something tightened in my chest. Not a dramatic jolt or sudden fear, just a slow, deliberate constriction, like the air itself had thickened. I rolled down the window to steady myself, expecting the usual countryside sounds. Birds cutting through the trees, insects thrumming, a breeze shuffling leaves. But there was nothing, not a single note of life. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was structured, intentional, the kind of quiet that doesn't happen naturally, the kind that feels placed. I kept waiting for a crow to call out, or for the wind to brush against the car, but the trees stood perfectly still, like they had been painted that way. Not even a loose leaf twitched. The stillness followed me down the empty road. No vehicles, no footsteps, no distant rustle, and I found myself glancing in the rearview mirror more often than necessary, as if the silence was forming a shape behind me. I tried to tell myself this was rural life, just slower, softer. But even the smallest towns breathe. This one held its breath. As I reached the first cluster of houses, I saw movement, a curtain shifting, a shadow stepping back, a door closing with unnatural softness, like someone trying not to be heard. And then the people appeared, if they could be called that. They stood on porches, sidewalks, doorways, not approaching, not speaking, just watching. Their eyes followed me with a strange patience, the kind that made my skin tighten. They didn't glare, they didn't smile. Their expressions drifted somewhere between curiosity and expectation, like they had been told someone was coming and were quietly confirming it was me. What unsettled me most was their blinking, slow, delayed, almost reluctant. They would stare unbroken for painfully long stretches and then blink once, almost mechanically, as if remembering the motion a beat too late. I drove slowly, not because the road required it, but because speeding past those faces felt like it would break some unspoken rule. Every pair of eyes tracked my car with the same eerie precision, heads turning in perfect unison, like puppets controlled by the same unseen string. I felt a drop in my stomach, not fear exactly, but a profound wrongness, the way you feel when you realize a room you thought was empty has someone standing in the corner. I tried to look at anything else, the buildings, the trees, the sky, but everywhere I turned, the silence pressed closer. That's when I noticed the posters. At first, they were just old, sun-faded billboards from decades ago. Campaign ads, community events, missing pet notices long irrelevant. But as I slowed the car and looked more closely, a sharp, involuntary chill crawled up my spine. Every single poster had one thing in common, a name scratched out so violently the paper had torn through. The surname was mine. Not written recently, not freshly carved. These were old posters, years old. But the marks over my family name were deep, angry, deliberate, layered scratches, like someone kept returning to them again and again, ensuring the name stayed erased. I leaned closer to one of the billboards as I passed. Even through the worn-out ink and peeling paper, I could still make out what had been there before the tearing. My father's last name, unmistakable. Not common enough to be coincidence. My pulse quickened. I looked at a storefront window next. Same thing. A decades-old advertisement for a harvest festival, the family sponsoring the event identified below. The surname was carved with such force the glass beneath was nicked. I felt a sudden urge to leave, turn the car around and drive back before whatever this was recognized me more clearly. But something else held me there, something deeper than curiosity. This town wasn't just avoiding my family, it had tried to erase us. The silence pressed harder now, as if listening to my thoughts. Ahead, a woman stood by the roadside, her hands clasped in front of her, her gaze fixed at me with unsettling clarity. She didn't move as I approached, she simply waited, too still, too steady. For a moment, I thought she might step forward and speak, but she didn't. She just watched and blinked, once, sluggishly. I realized then that I couldn't keep pretending these were normal quirks of an isolated town. Something was wrong here, deeply wrong, and my father's fear was no longer some exaggerated childhood memory. It was real, it was here, and it had noticed me. I felt a cold tremor run through my spine as I rolled to a stop near the center of town. Whether I wanted to or not, I needed answers, not guesses, not assumptions, real answers. And the only place I could get them was from the very people staring at me now, unblinking in the stillness.
The small general store was the only building that looked even remotely alive. Its dim lights flickered behind dusty windows, casting a weak, trembling glow onto the street. Maybe it was desperation or the instinctive need to anchor myself in something familiar, but I pushed open the door. A rusty bell clattered overhead, not ringing so much as rattling, like it hadn't been touched in years. Inside, the air felt stale, not rotten or abandoned, just unmoved, as if conversation hadn't occurred here in a long time. Shelves lined with canned goods sat too neatly, labels yellowed. The hum of an old refrigerator tried to fill the silence, but only made it more aware of itself. I didn't see him at first. Then a figure shuffled out from behind the counter, a thin, elderly man with a spine curved forward, as if even standing upright took negotiation. His eyes lifted to my face, and something inside him recoiled, not subtly, not politely. His expression folded into terror so quickly I almost stepped back in reflex. He didn't speak, didn't greet me. His breath hitched sharply, and for a moment I thought he might run. I'm just looking for some information, I managed, my voice sounding too loud in the room. He shook his head before I even finished the sentence, not in refusal, in warning. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. His voice was fragile, like paper left in sunlight too long. "Not with that name." My stomach tightened. "You knew my father?" At the mention, something flickered behind his eyes, recognition wrapped in dread, like the memory of a wound that never healed. His gaze drifted toward the window, then back to me, as if checking whether something or someone had followed. "He had a debt," the old man murmured, "one he never paid, and now—" He stopped abruptly, inhaling sharply, as if he'd said too much. His hand trembled violently as he reached for the counter to steady himself. "What debt?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "What are you talking about?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stared at me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "They don't forget blood," he whispered. Before I could speak, he flinched, eyes snapping toward the door as the bell rattled again. The sheriff stepped inside, boots heavy against the warped floorboards. Everything in the shopkeeper collapsed inward at the sight of him. Shoulders hunched, mouth clamped shut, hands tucked close like a scolded child. The sheriff didn't even look at him. His focus landed squarely on me. "You," he said. "Outside." There was no aggression in his voice, no shout,
just command, simple and immovable. I followed him out onto the porch, the cold air hitting harder than before. He waited until the door closed behind us, then took one step closer, lowering his voice. "You need to leave town," he said. Not suggested, stated, right now. "Why?" I asked. "Because of my father? Because of some—" He cut me off with a slight, almost imperceptible shake of the head. "I'm not explaining anything. I'm telling you to get in your car and drive until this place is behind you." "Something happened here," I said. 30 years ago. A disappearance. My family name was—" "You don't want the history," he said sharply. "You don't want the truth. Trust me." But that was the problem. I didn't trust him. I didn't trust the shopkeeper's trembling silence. I didn't trust the townspeople's long blinks and longer stares. I didn't trust any of this. "What debt did my father owe?" I pushed. "What bloodline are you talking about?" The sheriff's jaw tightened. His gaze shifted just slightly to the tree line behind me, as if expecting something to step out. "It's not your fault," he said quietly, "but you're standing in the place where fault doesn't matter anymore." A shiver rolled down my spine. "Is someone after me?" I asked. The sheriff didn't answer. Instead, he leaned in just enough for me to feel the cold on his breath. "Leave before nightfall," he said. "If you stay, you'll give them what they've been waiting for." He turned, walked back to his patrol car, and drove off without another word. I stood there, heart punching against my ribs, watching the dust settle in the street. The shopkeeper stayed inside. Every window along the road seemed to have a face behind it, still, waiting, blinking too slowly. A debt, a ritual, a disappearance tied to my bloodline. They had given me nothing, and somehow that nothing felt worse than the truth, because half-truths don't close doors, they open them. And I realized then, standing alone on that quiet street, that I wasn't leaving. I couldn't, not until I understood what my father had carried all those years, and what had followed him out of this place. Whatever it was still here, and it knew me. I tried to ground myself in something rational, something that would break the rhythm of the town's staring eyes, but the more I walked its narrow streets, the more the place seemed to react, not to my presence, but to me specifically, almost like it recognized something I didn't. It started with the clocks. Every building had one. Small brass ones in windows, plastic ones above store counters, chipped wooden ones on porch walls. Old-fashioned, most of them, with ticking hands instead of digital screens. They were slow, often mismatched, probably decades behind modern standards, yet functional. They ticked when I entered the town. I heard them. I remember it clearly. But as I walked down the main street, something strange happened. The first clock, an old pendulum piece beside the antique store, ticked twice, then stopped dead. The pendulum froze mid-swing, as if the moment itself had been trapped. 2:13 a.m. The time on the face didn't change, didn't even shudder. I paused, staring at it, trying to convince myself it was just a coincidence, a mechanical failure. Old clocks do that. But when I turned the corner, the hardware store's clock, one I distinctly remembered hearing ticking earlier, froze too. 2:13 a.m. A static second, a second the town refused to let pass. I didn't want to make eye contact with the locals, but curiosity pushed my gaze outward. People were watching from porches, sidewalks, inside cars parked too perfectly along the street. And the unsettling part wasn't that they were watching, it was how they were watching. They weren't shocked, they weren't confused, they were waiting, as if they'd been expecting this exact moment. One woman, her posture rigid, hands neatly folded, tilted her head in a slow, deliberate movement, her gaze fixed on the frozen clock behind me, then on me, then back to the clock, testing something, measuring something. I stepped away, pulse rising, and the entire line of observers subtly shifted, following the movement. I couldn't hear their footsteps, only the soft scrape of gravel under shoes, oddly synchronized, like a quiet ritual they'd rehearsed. I needed answers, something tangible, something that didn't involve the way the air tightened when I walked by. The library sat near the town square, a squat brick building with tall windows and a heavy door that groaned faintly when I pulled it open. Inside, the smell of dust and old paper wrapped around me. Unlike the store, this place felt occupied, not lived in, but watched over, maintained the way someone tends to a grave. When I asked the librarian, an elderly woman with sunken eyes, if there were any historical archives, she nodded once and pointed silently to a far hallway. Not a word, not a blink. The archive room was lined with framed photographs documenting town gatherings, festivals, school classes, council meetings. Time stamped each frame. Some went back nearly 50 years. At first, nothing caught my attention. Then something did. A photograph from 30 years ago, a group picture from a harvest celebration. Townsfolk smiling, children holding lanterns, the sheriff from earlier looking decades younger. And standing near the back, my father, 20-something, sharp-featured, wearing a jacket I vaguely remembered seeing in storage boxes when I was young. Except the date at the bottom read a year before I was born. He would have been across the state at that time, working at the mill, living with my mother. He couldn't have been here. I moved to another photo, another town gathering. My father again, this time with his hand resting on the shoulder of a man listed on a missing persons poster I'd seen near the entrance. Another, my father beside a family of 4 whose house, the librarian said earlier, was taken by the town. Another, him standing next to the same shopkeeper who had trembled at the sight of me. My father wasn't a visitor. My father belonged here. Or something about him did. I kept flipping through the albums, each page making my breath shallower. The photographs didn't feel like memories, they felt like accusations. My father standing where he shouldn't, smiling with people who later vanished, present in moments of history erased everywhere else except here. The soft hum of the library lights faded. A cool shiver brushed the back of my neck. The air changed, not colder exactly, but heavier, denser, as though the room was exhaling slowly, deliberately. Then, a voice. Not loud, not whispered, somewhere between breath and thought, threading itself through the stillness behind me. It said my full name. Not the shortened version people use, not the nickname I grew up with. My full name, the one only my father said, and only when he was angry or afraid. I turned sharply. No one stood behind me. The hallway was empty. But the whisper hadn't been imagined. It had shape, direction, intent. And the moment I tried to steady myself, tried to breathe normally, the déjà vu began. Not just the vague familiarity people talk about. This was sharper, specific. I felt like I had stood in this exact library, in this exact corner, staring at these exact photographs before. Same cold on my skin, same knot in my stomach, same whisper curling behind my ear. I should have left. Rationality said to walk out, get in the car, drive anywhere but here. But something inside me pushed back, something deeper than curiosity. The photographs had revealed a truth my father had locked away. He lived a second life, a hidden one that didn't align with the man who raised me in rigid silence. And I realized with creeping clarity, I wasn't just uncovering his past, I was stepping into it. The whisper, My name again, closer this time, cut through the silence. I didn't turn. I couldn't bring myself to. Because for the first time since arriving, I understood something undeniable. Whatever haunted this town recognized me as his son. And it was getting closer.
I stayed in the library longer than I should have. The photographs had already cut something open inside me, but I kept searching, driven by a quiet panic I tried to disguise as curiosity. I moved through drawers, binders, cardboard boxes labeled in faded marker. Most were harmless, old tax records, newsletters, meeting notes. But then I found a smaller box tucked behind a row of binders, as if someone had slid it there quickly, hoping it wouldn't be found. Inside were notebooks, thin, brittle things wrapped in twine. My father's handwriting leapt at me immediately, sharp, slanted, impatient. I remembered that script well. Grocery lists, apologies never spoken out loud, half-finished sentences in the margins of newspapers. My fingers didn't feel like mine as I untied the first book. The entries were dated roughly 30 years back, the same time frame as the disappearances. And right away, the tone wasn't what I expected. It wasn't the distant, private writing of a young man. It was frantic, confessional, like someone documenting a crime they couldn't undo. I didn't want to agree, one entry began, but they said the watcher had chosen my bloodline. I thought if I refused, it would take the boy I didn't even have yet. My stomach lurched. I read the next line slower, each one feeling like a step into something cold. They said the town survives because of the pact, that the watcher needs a tether, a bloodline to hold it here. It sees through eyes that look like ours. It follows whatever name it binds to. It can wait as long as it must. The room around me dimmed, or maybe I stopped noticing the lights. Another entry, written shaky and smeared. They call it a ritual, but it's a sacrifice. One person from the chosen line stays, lives here, keeps it anchored. I agreed because I thought I could handle it, because I was young enough to believe obedience meant safety. But the moment I felt it watching me, I knew I couldn't do it. No one should have to. I felt a weight settle on my chest, slow and suffocating. He ran. My father didn't just leave the town, he fled it. Fled something ancient, something that clung to him the way mold clings to the dampest parts of a house. The next entry was worse. It knows I'm running. I hear it at night, in the walls, in the trees, in the empty rooms. It can't leave fully, not without the ritual completed, but it reaches, it touches. Sometimes I hear it say my full name. Sometimes I see myself in places I haven't been. I stepped back from the box. The whisper from earlier, the one that spoke my name exactly the way he used to, now made a sickening kind of sense. This wasn't a haunting, it was a continuation. I forced myself to read the last intact page. If anyone finds this, my son must never return. If he steps inside those borders, the pact resets. The watcher will bind to him. They will try to keep him alive long enough to finish what I broke. Don't trust the sheriff. Don't trust the elders. They need him breathing. My heart hammered. The town hadn't been threatening me. They'd been protecting me, preserving me, because they needed me intact, not harmed, not scared away, alive. A sudden creak echoed through the library, soft but pointed. It came from the hallway. Slow footsteps followed, deliberate and evenly spaced, like someone approaching with purpose rather than hesitation. I slid the notebooks back into the box, hands trembling, and shut it gently as the footsteps drew closer. My pulse climbed up into my throat. Each step was heavier than the one before it, and I realized with a crawling dread that whoever was coming was alone and unhurried. A silhouette appeared at the end of the hallway, stopping just outside the threshold of light.
They didn't move, didn't speak. They just stood, watching me, not suspiciously, expectantly. My father's words burned through my mind. They need him breathing. The sheriff hadn't warned me out of kindness. The townspeople hadn't stared at me because they hated me. The clocks freezing, the whispers, the photographs, all of it was the same thing circling around me. The Watcher, bound to the bloodline, waiting for me to step into the role my father abandoned. And now, I finally understood the worst part. It wasn't hunting me to kill me. It was hunting me to keep me, to finish its ritual, to make me the anchor my father refused to become. The figure in the hallway took one slow step toward me. My breath stilled in my chest, and in that moment, dread took a new form, not the fear of dying, but the terror of surviving exactly the way this town wanted. I left the library with the box of confessions burned into my memory, my father's voice lingering in the back of my skull like a fingerprint I'd never noticed before. The hallway where that figure had stood was empty when I passed through. Not cleared, emptied, like something had stepped out of sight instead of walking away. Outside, the air felt wrong. Not colder, not darker, expectant, as if the whole town was holding its breath. I went straight to my car. I didn't run, but every step felt like a negotiation with panic. The engine started on the first try, a tiny victory, and I pulled out of the parking lot, following the one main road back toward the highway. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The landscape didn't change. Same row of leaning houses, same sagging mailbox, same crooked telephone pole with the peeling yellow flyer. I slowed down, confused. Maybe I'd taken a wrong turn. Maybe my nerves were twisting my sense of direction. I checked my phone. The GPS map rotated in confused circles, arrows spiraling, recalculating endlessly with no direction. My compass app spun too. North was south, then east, then everywhere. The car rolled past the same mailbox again. I forced myself to keep driving, refusing to believe the fear tightening across my ribs. Another 10 minutes, another turn, another forced optimism. Then the church appeared at the end of the road, black steeple stabbing at the sky, windows boarded, front doors chained together. I knew I hadn't driven toward it, but there it was, like the town had folded around me. I hit the brakes. Silence swallowed the street. A soft tap on my window made me jump so hard my teeth clacked together. The sheriff stood outside the car, expression unreadable. No hostility, no urgency, just the exhausted patience of someone waiting for a child to stop resisting what's inevitable. "You took a wrong turn," he said mildly. "Happens to visitors." "I'm not a visitor," I said, too quickly, too sharply. "And you know damn well I didn't take a wrong turn." The sheriff's eyes flicked to the church behind me. "You should come inside, talk to us properly. There's a lot you don't understand." His tone was firm, but underneath it was something worse: sincerity. The townspeople began appearing then, quietly from porches, corners, vehicles parked too neatly along the road. They didn't surround me, not yet. They simply filled the space, a loose, silent perimeter. I could have sworn their movement synced with the faint hum in the air, the one that rose every time they blinked too slowly. "I'm not going anywhere with you," I whispered. "We're only trying to help you," someone said behind me, a voice too calm for the situation. My father's words echoed, "They need him breathing." I put the car in reverse, but the sheriff stepped behind it without hesitation, as if he knew I wouldn't run him down, as if he knew I couldn't, because that hum in the air, it was inside my skull now, a faint vibration beneath thought itself. "Come back, come back, come back." The whisper wasn't outside. It wasn't in my ears. It was inside me. I stumbled out of the car, breath shaking, because staying inside felt like being trapped in a pressurized box. The townspeople parted gently, guiding without touching, their bodies forming a path toward the church. No commands, no threats, just quiet insistence. Each step I took, the whisper pulsed harder, like a heartbeat behind my eyes. Finish what he broke. I clamped my hands against my temples, but the pressure only intensified. The world flickered. Not the light, the edges of things. Corners bending slightly, shadows stretching longer than their shapes should allow. Then I saw it. In the rearview mirror of my car, a silhouette behind me. Tall, still, shaped like a man but lacking edges, almost like smoke taught to stand upright. Its head tilted slowly, as if curious, as if trying on the gesture for the first time. My heart seized. I spun around. Nothing stood there. But the sheriff nodded slightly, as if he could see the terror blooming across my face. "You felt it," he said quietly. "You understand why you can't leave." I didn't agree to any of this. Your father did. It wasn't anger in his tone. It was inevitability. The townspeople closed the circle tighter. A soft crunch of gravel sounded behind me. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, perfectly matched to the pounding in my head. I didn't turn. Some part of me already knew I wouldn't see it fully, not yet, not until I reached the place it wanted me most. The church loomed over us, doors creaking even without wind. A draft slipped through the slats, warm, not cold, like breath. The sheriff gestured toward it. "This is where we talk, where we finish what he left undone." I felt the whisper move closer, sliding like smoke beneath thought, coiling into something almost tender. "Step inside. I've waited." My pulse stuttered. The townspeople didn't force me forward. They simply stood still, waiting for the moment I realized there was no escape, no road out, no ignoring the thing stitched into my blood. Every path here curved back to the same point, the ritual site, the Watcher's threshold. And as the shadow behind me took one soft step closer, I finally understood this wasn't a fight anymore. It was an appointment, one my father missed, and now it was my turn. The church doors didn't open so much as give way, as if the wood had been waiting, softened by age or by something else entirely, to accept me. The townspeople pushed me forward with a strange gentleness, like pallbearers guiding the inevitable. Their eyes never met mine. They kept them lowered, trained on the floor, on the shadows, anywhere but my face. That terrified me more than if they'd been openly hostile. People who believed they were doing the right thing didn't need to look at the sacrifice. The air inside the church clung to my throat, thick with cold dust. Every breath tasted like forgotten prayers. The pews were warped, the stained glass cloudy, the altar draped in fabric that looked too new, too carefully placed, as though someone tended to this dead building with obsessive reverence, a place abandoned yet prepared. I tried to speak, some useless protest, but the sound barely made it past my teeth. It wasn't fear that choked me, it was the subtle feeling that words didn't belong here, that sound itself was a trespass. A low murmur rippled through the crowd behind me. Not speech, not even agreement, more like resignation, a practiced exhale from people who had rehearsed this moment all their lives. The sheriff stepped around me. His posture was steady, but his hands trembled, barely perceptible. "Just stay still," he muttered, though not to me, more like to whatever watched us through the dim corners of the church. For a moment, nothing moved. Then the lights, or what passed for lights, shifted. It was subtle at first, the shadows rearranging themselves along the walls, stretching as though blinking awake. My vision blurred. My heartbeat didn't race, it slowed, thickened. Each pulse felt like a hand pressing against the inside of my ribs. A shape slid into view on the altar, not stepping, not walking, simply appearing where it hadn't been a blink before. Its outline was human only if someone had described human incorrectly, and someone else tried to sculpt that description from darkness. A tall silhouette, too narrow at the waist, too still, too patient. The Watcher. The townspeople dropped to their knees in one fluid, synchronized motion, not reverence, surrender. I remained standing, not out of strength, but because my legs forgot how to bend. The Watcher turned its faceless head toward them first, as if acknowledging a debt paid. Then it turned to me, and every inch of air between us seemed to warp, as though it was inhaling the space around my body. I felt it tug at my thoughts, unraveling them, threading its own presence in the gaps. And then the memories hit. Not mine, my father's. The church dissolved around me, replaced by a night that felt older than the town. Rain without sound, trees without leaves, people, faces I dimly recognized from the missing posters, standing in a circle, their eyes hollowed by terror. My father at the center, younger, desperate, clutching a knife he didn't fully understand how to hold. He wasn't trying to protect them, he was trying to escape. One of the townspeople, a woman, crying, reached out to him, pleading. He stepped back and let her be taken first. The Watcher had no shape then, just a gravity, a hunger. The memory distorted as my father ran. Another was taken, and another. The circle fell apart. Only he remained alive, sprinting into the dark with the ritual half finished, and the entity tethered loosely to our bloodline. I felt his panic surge through my chest like a second heartbeat, felt the moment he realized he condemned not just himself, but every generation after him. The memory shattered. I staggered forward, gripping the edge of a rotten pew to stay upright. The Watcher's head hovered inches from mine now, though I couldn't recall it moving. Its presence pressed into me like cold fingertips sliding along my thoughts, searching for an opening, for compliance. Behind me, the sheriff whispered, "Do it. Bind yourself. Free us." The rest echoed him under their breath, not begging, expecting. I understood then, this wasn't a rescue attempt, this was a transaction. The town was offering me up not to destroy the Watcher, but to give it what it wanted, a host tied to my father's bloodline, the completion of a ritual abandoned 30 decades ago. Two choices took shape, stark and unforgiving. Bind myself to the Watcher, becoming its keeper, its vessel, its anchor, the town would be free, and I would never belong to myself again. Or tear down the symbols etched on the floorboards, the ones guiding the ritual, break the containment entirely, and let the entity roam unfettered. The town might fall, more might follow, but I would not be its prison. A cold whisper slid across the back of my skull, my full name curling through my mind like a hand closing around it. I grabbed the edge of the altar to stay upright. The wood pulsed faintly like a slowed heartbeat. My father's voice, not a memory, but something else, rose behind it. "Don't let it chain you." A shadow flickered in my peripheral vision. I turned. My father. Or what was left of him. His form was thin, wavering, held together by will rather than flesh. His face, half recognizable, twisted with fear, not for himself, but for me. He mouthed something I couldn't hear. The watcher reacted instantly. The shadows snapped upward, curling around his apparition, strangling his presence until his outline buckled and broke apart like burnt paper. The church went dead silent. Every pair of eyes turned to me, and I realized my decision wasn't going to wait. The watcher leaned close, a hiss like a breath drawn inward. I moved. Not towards safety, there wasn't any. Not towards surrender, my father's last look made sure of that. But toward the carved circle at the base of the altar. My hand hovered over the wood, and the moment my fingers touched the wood, the entire church shuddered as if something beneath it woke up.
Morning arrived without sunlight. I didn't realize that at first. I thought the grayness leaking through the church doors was just fog or ash or some residue of what happened hours earlier. But when I stepped outside, legs trembling, throat raw from breathing air that felt borrowed, it hit me. The sky wasn't cloudy. It was simply vacant. A color without source. A morning that didn't belong to any weather. The town square stood completely empty. Not quiet. Empty. The benches where the old men had glared at me were gone. The grocery awning, the flickering street lamp, the newspaper box with its outdated headlines, gone. Even the sheriff's car, the one blocking the highway the night before, had vanished without so much as tire tracks in the dirt. The buildings were still there, but hollowed out. Windows gaped open into darkness, doors hung from hinges. No sense of cooking, no electricity humming in the lines overhead, no footprints but mine. It felt less like a town abandoned and more like a once living thing that had shed its skin during the night. I walked through the empty streets, waiting for someone to shout my name, waiting for the watcher to whisper inside my skull again, but nothing happened. The silence didn't press against me anymore. It just drifted, thin and harmless like the aftertaste of a nightmare that had burned itself out. Halfway down the main road, I realized I couldn't remember how the ritual ended. There was motion and heat and something pulling at me, then a cold rush as if falling backward through water, and then waking on the church floor alone, my hand still hovering above the carved circle, though it had been obliterated, split clean in two as if struck by lightning. I tried to focus on the gaps in my memory, but my mind slid off them like oil on glass. Maybe the watcher was gone. Maybe destroying the circle had broken its tether. Maybe I was finally free. Every rational thought told me to run those maybes into belief, to accept the relief settling into my bones like warm sand after winter. So I did what felt most reasonable. I walked back to my car, found it exactly where I'd left it at the town border, and drove home. Roads didn't loop, the GPS worked, the world resumed its usual shape. By the time I reached my driveway, the sky had finally found its color again. Pale blue, too normal, almost mocking. Inside my house, everything looked untouched. Keys on the counter, coat draped over the chair, half-open window catching a faint breeze. It felt absurdly comforting, real, ordinary. For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe. Hours passed in a haze. I made tea, sat on the couch, tried to piece together what happened, but kept hitting those blank seams in my mind where memories should have been stitched. Night crept in quietly. I went to my bedroom, exhausted. I flicked on the light and froze. On the wall above my bed, the wood was carved, freshly gouged, splinters still clinging to the edges. Not vandalism, not random, a message scrawled with the same sharp, urgent strokes my father used when he wrote grocery lists or angry notes on the fridge. Don't let it in again. My breath left me in a single sharp exhale. I stepped closer, fingers trembling as I touched the grooves. They were still warm, as if carved minutes ago, as if someone or something had stood exactly where I was standing now. My pulse hammered so loudly I almost didn't hear the soft creak behind me.
Almost. I turned my head slowly, dread dragging through every muscle, and looked in the mirror on the opposite wall. My reflection stared back, but I wasn't alone in it. Something tall and thin stood directly behind me, its silhouette stretched upwards, head tilted in that unnatural, listening way. No features, no face, just that soft distortion of space around it, the faint warping of light, like a shadow cast by a figure that didn't belong to this world. My real surroundings remained empty, but in the reflection, it leaned closer. I didn't breathe, didn't blink. Its shape sharpened, the air thickened. My father's carved warning seemed to pulse in my peripheral vision. Don't let it in again. And then, in the reflection, the silhouette lifted its hand, slowly, patiently, and placed it on my shoulder. I didn't feel a touch, but I felt the weight of something crossing a threshold. Not into the room, into me.
You listened till the end because somewhere this story connected with you. If you heard something, don't look back, move forward, and be silent. This channel is for those who enjoy stories that stay in their mind long after they're over. If this story gave you that feeling, support the channel by subscribing it and stay connected with me in this video.